As colonists sought to build a new life, and Native Americans strived to protect their ancestral lands, the balance between coexistence and conflict constantly teetered. Just a decade after the iconic Thanksgiving feast, the ominous clouds of the Pequot War gathered, marking one of the earliest and bloodiest conflicts between colonists and Native Americans. Welcome to Stranger History and Part 2 to the First Thanksgiving and What Went Wrong. If you like learning about our strange history, go ahead and like and subscribe to our channel. The Pequot War, which unfolded between 1636 and 1638, delineates a dark and contentious chapter in early American history. Situated within the broader context of the burgeoning European colonization and the Native American response, the conflict starkly highlighted the intensifying clash of divergent cultures, competing interests, and contested territorial claims. This video endeavors to elucidate the multifaceted elements that catalyzed the Pequot and King Philip's War, exploring the impact it levied upon both the indigenous tribes and English colonists. The initial strains between the Pequot tribe and English colonists emanated from an intricate tapestry of cultural misapprehensions and overt territorial infringements. As English settlers augmented their presence and sought to amplify their territorial acquisitions in what is now Connecticut, inevitable friction materialized with the Pequot tribe, who vehemently sought to safeguard their ancestral lands and preserve their way of life. So in other words, the Pequots and the English colonists did not have the same definition of land ownership, which was also lost in translation. Simultaneously, the death of traders, often attributed to the Pequots, such as the case of John Oldham, and other igniting instances, fueled a virulent spiral of mistrust and antagonism that would inexorably guide both entities towards war. Commencing officially in 1636, the Pequot War witnessed a cycle of unbridled brutality and devastating engagements, with both sides deploying tactics that were pitiless and unrestrained. A pivotal moment, both in terms of its sheer barbarity and its impact on the war's trajectory, was the Mystic Massacre in 1637. English forces, aided by allied Narragansett and Mohegan warriors, orchestrated a cataclysmic attack on the Pequot village at Mystic, resulting in widespread death, destruction, and massacring over 500 people, including women and children. This ferocious assault did not merely represent a military action, but it symbolized the acutely divergent worlds and moral compasses of the combatants involved. The brutality that unfolded at Mystic even shocked some Puritans like William Bradley, who wrote, "It was a fearful sight to see them frying in the fire." Moreover, it is imperative to acknowledge the multifaceted alliances and external influences that permeated the conflict. The Pequot War was not a dichotomous clash between monolithic entities, but was instead permeated by internal tribal dynamics, differing priorities amongst English colonies, and Dutch interests in the region. The alliances forged by the English with other Native American tribes, such as the Narragansett and Mohegan, and the utilization of their knowledge and warriors, was instrumental in shaping the war's outcome. Similarly, the role of the Dutch, albeit nuanced and often overshadowed, added a layer of complexity to the geopolitical and commercial facets of the conflict. The war culminated with the decisive subjugation of the Pequot tribe, leading to extensive death, enslavement, and the dispersal of survivors among other tribes. The Treaty of Hartford in 1638 signified not merely the formal conclusion of hostilities, but symbolized the pervasive displacement and dissolution of the Pequot tribe, as their lands were seized and remaining members were either sold into slavery or assimilated into other tribes. What we can take away from this conflict is that natives were outmatched by numbers and superior firepower from the English. The ramifications of the Pequot War extended far beyond its immediate aftermath. It molded future colonial and indigenous interactions, establishing a precedent of violent conflict resolution and tribal fragmentation. For the English colonists, it facilitated the expansion of their territories and influence, while for Native American tribes, it exemplified the existential threat posed by European expansionism. Thus, The Pequot War became a harbinger of future conflicts and power dynamics that would characterize colonial Native American relations in the ensuing decades. Post-Pequot War, the semblance of peace graced the region, albeit anchored on the sands of unsettled disagreements, fears, and reciprocal suspicions between the English colonists and indigenous tribes. Colonial expansion, heightened by the influx of new settlers from Europe, permeated through indigenous territories, engendering disputes and silent animosities that would fester through the ensuing decades. Meanwhile, Native American tribes, reckoning with shifting power dynamics and the scars from the Pequot War, sought both accommodation and resistance to the encroaching colonial tide. The divergent worldviews of the colonists and Native Americans, particularly in relation to land ownership, spirituality, and governance, increasingly became a source of friction. Colonists, being the altruists that they were, viewed the indigenous peoples through a lens tinted with superiority and paternalism, attempted to impose their beliefs, systems, and cultural norms upon the Native Americans. This cultural imperialism manifested in various forms, such as the pressure to adopt Christianity and English lifestyles, thereby fermenting discontent and resistance among indigenous populations. Economic interactions between the colonists and indigenous tribes in this interlude were paradoxically cooperative and exploitative. Trade relations involving the exchange of European goods for furs and other local commodities enhanced interdependencies while also sowing seeds of conflict through unethical practices and economic disparities. Moreover, some Native Americans became entangled in colonial economies, sometimes being forced into unfavorable land deals to settle debts, further amplifying tensions. Numerous instances where the colonists subjected Native Americans to English laws and trials, often with a blatant disregard for indigenous customs and legal systems, also marred relations. The enforcement of English jurisdiction upon Native American tribes underscored not merely the pragmatic disputes of legal cases, but symbolized the broader imposition of colonial will and the diminution of indigenous sovereignty. The political landscape, punctuated by alliances, leadership changes, and nuanced loyalties, also molded the prelude to King Philip's War. The death of Massasoit, the Sachem of the Wampanoags, and the subsequent leadership of his sons, Wamsuta and Metacom, introduced new political and generational dynamics into the colonial indigenous matrix. These leadership shifts, combined with growing dissatisfaction among younger Native Americans and colonists, inexorably altered the political and social milieu. As the clouds of King Philip's War loomed over New England, the echoes of the past, the unhealed wounds of the Pequot War, the relentless colonial expansion, and the unabated erosion of indigenous autonomy converged into a storm of conflict. Metacom, inheriting a landscape rife with cultural, economic, and political tensions, stepped into a narrative that was as much a product of long-standing systemic issues as it was of specific incidents. The intertwining tales of the colonists and Native Americans between the Pequot War and King Philip's War invite reflections on themes of power, resistance, and the tragic trajectories of unbridled expansionism. Within the tapestry of these stories, the myriad experiences, perspectives, and voices beckon contemporary audiences to grapple with the legacies and moral complexities that continue to resonate through the corridors of history. King Philip's War, 1675 to 1676, perhaps one of the most impactful yet often overlooked conflicts in the tapestry of American history, introduced an era of heightened tension, brutal conflict, and transformative change between English colonists and Native American tribes in the New England region. Metacom, known to the English as King Philip because of their renowned cultural sensitivity, was the Sachem of the Wampanoag tribe, stands emblematically at the center of this struggle, signifying the indigenous resistance against the burgeoning tide of colonial expansion. Crucial to understanding the eruption of King Philip's War is acknowledging the accumulating tensions seeded by divergent cultural worldviews, territorial encroachments, and the pervasive breakdown of earlier peaceful cohabitations between Native Americans and English colonists. The Pilgrims, who established Plymouth Colony in 1620, initially forged a diplomatic relationship with the Wampanoag tribe, symbolically cemented by the first Thanksgiving. However, as colonial ambitions expanded, generating an insatiable appetite for indigenous lands and resources, mutual suspicions and sporadic violence began to percolate, eroding the fragile peace. The spark that ultimately ignited the conflagration of King Philip's War can be pinpointed to various events, notably the trial and execution of 3 Wampanoag men accused of the murder of John Sassamon, a Native American Christian convert who had warned the Massachusetts Bay Colony of Metacom's uprising plans. Metacom, observing the inexorable erosion of Wampanoag autonomy and the implacable advance of English colonialism, sought to unite various Native American tribes in a collective effort to stem this tide. The war unfolded with devastating brutality, marked by ferocious attacks on colonial settlements and equally harsh reprisals. As the war expanded, engulfing the broader New England region, it evolved into a vortex of unrestrained violence and suffering, profoundly impacting Native American tribes and English colonies alike. While Native American forces initially achieved several significant victories, devastating numerous settlements, the tide ultimately turned against them, partially due to the lack of a unified indigenous front and the colonists' formidable resources. On December 19, 1675, when a colonial force of approximately 1,000 militia from the New England Confederation and their native allies attacked a fortified Narragansett village in South Kingstown, Rhode Island. The village, situated in the middle of a swamp for strategic defense, was assaulted during the harsh New England winter. Colonial forces set the village ablaze, leading to a fierce battle that resulted in significant casualties among the Narragansett, including many non-combatants. This attack, while a strategic victory for the colonists, marked a tragic turn in the war, severely weakening the Narragansett tribe's ability to resist colonial expansion and contributing to the eventual downfall of Native American sovereignty in the region. The battle was notorious for its brutality and the suffering it inflicted, epitomizing the war's cruel nature and its lasting impact on the cultural and demographic landscape of New England. In August 1676, after months of fierce warfare which strained the resources and populations of both the English settlers and native tribes, Metacom was betrayed and then killed in a swamp in Bristol, Rhode Island, by a party led by Captain Benjamin Church. But the indignities heaped upon Metacom did not end with his death. They took on a gruesome symbolic resonance in the subsequent actions of the triumphant colonists. In a grisly act that aimed to underscore colonial power and subjugate the indigenous spirit, Metacom's body was drawn and quartered. As a final insult, his head was mounted on a tall pike and displayed at the entrance of Fort Plymouth. There, it remained a macabre exhibition for over 20 years, serving as both a trophy for the settlers and a chilling reminder to Native Americans of the cost of rebellion. The colonial appetite for demonstrating dominance did not stop at public displays. Pieces of Metacom's body were distributed as relics. His bones, scattered, were meant to symbolize the dispersal and weakening of Native American power and unity. The culmination of King Philip's War saw Metacom's death and the relative quelling of indigenous resistance in the New England region. However, its repercussions reverberated through the subsequent decades, sculpting the future interactions between English colonists and Native American tribes. The Native American population was significantly depleted through death, slavery, and displacement. Concurrently, the colonists, despite achieving a Pyrrhic victory, were beleaguered by the substantial human and economic costs of the war. The cultural chasm between Native Americans and colonists widened, as mutual resentment and mistrust became further entrenched. In reflecting upon King Philip's War, one discerns the echoing legacies of loss, cultural dissolution, and stark transformation within the colonial and indigenous landscapes. For Native American tribes, it symbolizes the tragic attenuation of their cultures, territories, and autonomies. For the English colonists, it underscored the harsh realities and moral complexities of establishing a new world amidst indigenous civilizations. Ultimately, King Philip's War illuminates the multifaceted narratives of resistance, survival, and adaptation, casting a somber light on the intertwined destinies of diverse peoples caught in the maelstrom of historical upheaval. As a lens into the complexities of colonial indigenous relations, King Philip's War invites ongoing exploration, dialogue, and reflection, ensuring that the voices, experiences, and moral quandaries of the past continue to resonate and inform contemporary understandings. This multifaceted conflict serves as an entry point to deeper inquiries into the moral, cultural, and human dimensions of historical encounters and transformations. In viewing history, particularly conflicts replete with diverse perspectives and experiences, an immersive exploration that delves into the varied narratives, sources, and scholarly dialogues is invaluable in nurturing a more nuanced understanding. So what's your opinion on the first Thanksgiving and the events surrounding it? Did your primary school focus on them, or did they gloss over these important events? And remember to like and subscribe if you learned anything new and like learning about our strange history.